Okay, so welcome everyone to the last workshop in this series for the Women in Innovation application. Um, I will be, as you know, I'm recording this session. We will have Q&A at the end, but if you want to type into the chat box any questions you have, if there's natural breaks or pauses, or at the end, we'll go through all those questions in the same way that we've done in the previous workshops. Please don't feel that you have to keep your camera on. It's a long workshop and it's a long day in front of a camera. So feel free to switch off the Zoom and enjoy the session. Now, I'd like Neil, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Certainly. I'm Neil Calder. I suppose my role here is as independent consultant, but I am a experienced assessor and monitoring officer for various various Innovate UK projects and schemes and all the rest of
it. Thanks. Solène, are you online? I can see you're logged in.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, fantastic.
Hi, everyone. Do you want me to just introduce myself?
Introduce yourself, yes, please.
Yes, great. My name is Solène. I think I've seen a few of you from the first workshop. I'm the project manager for equality, diversity, and inclusion at KTN. I joined the organization 5 weeks ago, so still very much learning and growing along with this set of applications for the Women in Innovation program, which I will be looking after alongside also the Young Innovators program. So very happy to be here. Thank you everyone for joining and looking forward to the session. Back to you, Emma.
Thanks. My name is Emma Fadlon. I work in the KTN in what is the investment team. It's a team within business development and investment. I work with companies who are looking to commercialize early stage technologies, and I'm helping with as you know, I've been helping with the applications process for the Women in Innovation. I've been supporting the program for a while, from its inception really, and also with the Young Innovators. So the theme of this workshop is for around your risk management and the risk register. And the theme is really to get you to think about what could possibly go wrong and how do you plan for that. So I'm just going to, before I hand over to Neil, who's going to be the main lead on this, I'm just going to go through a little bit of recap for those of you who've not been in the previous 2 workshops, and just a little bit of an introduction. So as we've said, this award, Women in Innovation, is for innovators who are looking to scale up or grow their innovative company, and are looking to carry out an innovative project. So this award funds the project, not the business. The aim of this workshop is to address question 9, and in particular the appendix around risk register. So what we're going to do is discuss how you break down the risks associated with the activities that you propose to undertake over the 12 months of the costed work packages, how to prepare the risk register, what risks to include, and how to use this as an ongoing project management and reporting tool. And Neil is a very experienced monitoring officer on the Innovate UK program, so he knows exactly how all of these tools and appendices are used as for reporting and monitoring to Innovate UK. And also what to consider as risks as well when you're working or dependent on any external parties and facilities. If you recall in the application, they specifically ask you around what resources, externals you might be using. And it's really important, if you are dependent on these or you're looking to access them, that you understand what risks they might have over the project. And as before, and as I said, we'll do a Q&A. We'll either find natural pauses to do the Q&A or cover everything at the end. So we will be scanning the chat box. So just a brief recap, the application, 3 sections. We've covered the application questions in workshops 1 and 2. The video pitch is 38% of your application, and you'll be submitting your finances. don't leave it to the last minute to submit. The system will fall over if everybody tries to do it at the same time, and we can't guarantee it if you don't, can't guarantee your application will go through if you leave it to the last moment. Read the guidance and the questions, make bullet points, keywords, capture your initial thoughts and identify any gaps when you start the application. So please don't start answering the questions, read everything through, make notes, plan yourself, plan your time and yourself and how you're going to approach things, any dependencies that you have on any other people, make sure you get all those aligned up front, and give yourself enough time to review before you submit. As I've said previously, you need, not working full time, but you need probably about 6 weeks. Don't underestimate how hard it is to complete the application. Even if you're an experienced grant writer, it's a lot more work than you think it is. Even though it's a simpler application than the main one, it's still a lot of work. It is an exam and it is a story. So the keywords and the answers are all contained in the questions. We have given you in the previous 2 workshops really good hints and guidance about how to approach answering those questions. There are 5 scored questions and the appendices. So there are 3 appendices we've discussed. This is the last one. You've got fixed times and word counts. So make sure that you align everything to that 12-month period, to that 50K, and that the word counts are appropriate for that particular question. And think about the impression you're making. Why is that? Because you will have provided us with a short summary of your project. It's not scored, but it's the first thing that myself I'm not an assessor for Innovate UK, but somebody like myself, an assessor, is going to read and think like, is this a great project? Really get that wow factor from this. And usually you can tell from actually this sort of summary what sort of style application you're going to get and what the content is. Apologies, I'm just going to admit a couple of additional people. Yeah. So the writing style, make sure it's short and punchy, it's active, it's the Economist editorial style. Really short sentences, 9, 10 to 12 words, not more than that. Really important you make a good first impression. And then, sorry, Neil.
Yes, is this coming through okay?
Yes, I can hear perfectly.
What I would say is that even at this stage, I think it's good to start to pepper the whole narrative with risks. Maybe at this point you want to almost refer to them as challenges. But I'd say risk and challenge are sometimes almost can be used, simultaneously or the same context. Actually, even in the summary, it's good to start to talk about the challenge that this project will face.
Yeah, it's good to think about those up front and as you're starting. That's a very good point there. Sorry, just going to say that it's going to be a public description. It's mandatory. The text will not be assessed, but it's what's going to go into the public domain and it's what's going to be published about you. And it's published in various places, everything from databases that investors use through to the Research Gateway for other. It could be used by companies, by other academic teams, or could be used by other stakeholders to look for projects that are of interest. You will have a gateway question, which is a scope question. This is a kind of a go, no go. So make sure that when you start your application, you're really clear about the scope of your application, that you've covered all of the key areas that they are looking for. This is very clearly spelt out in the application. So make sure that when you write your justification to why you're in scope, that you've covered everything. And remember, this award is not just about your innovation and what you're trying to do with your company. It's also about you, what sort of role model you're going to be, and you being a future leader. So it's really important that you cover all of those areas in this question. So I'm just going to do a little recap of what we covered in the other 2 areas. Not going to go into a lot of detail, but we talked about work packages and Gantt charts. And then this is how do you take the information in the work package and the Gantt chart and identify where the risks are in your project and how do you capture them into a risk register. So the assumptions we've got is that you've identified your innovation, how it fits into the business. You've outlined your work packages that are associated with the project. You've identified any interdependencies using your Gantt chart, and you've agreed timeframes with or have estimates from any external suppliers. So that's your resource requirements. So you understand where everything is. For those of you who have not been to the previous workshops, the links on here, the slides will be shared, are where you'll find the overview of the eligibility, the frequently asked questions. Those will be updated regularly as questions come through, and then the links to the first 2 workshops. So you'll find all the details, all the information for that in there. Remember, you're doing this project over a 12-month period, so really make sure you check your start and your finish dates. We described the hierarchy of work packages. So you've got an overall aim, objectives, tasks, and deliverables with milestones. And we've shown you how that then gets translated into a Gantt chart. So that is where you're visualizing your work packages, you're linking the tasks, you're showing the timelines to show and identify any dependencies on those tasks. And this is what you're going to use to start building out your risk matrix. And what you've got with that is very clear deliverables, milestones, and there might be some key activities which you can start to undertake in parallel, which are linked to achieving those particular milestones or finishing those particular work packages. As we've said previously, they can be as complex or as simple as you want them to be. We will talk about the different approaches depending on your projects, but we suggest you've got 12 months, you've got 50K, that you don't overcomplicate your work packages and overcomplicate your Gantt chart. But you do provide us information in there, which is not just about your project, but also about you and your role as a future leader, as a woman in innovation who's also going to be supporting the other women in your sector and in your field. So what is risk? So all projects have a risk. It's important to understand what those risks are, but it's also important to understand that risk can be either negative or positive. So a project risk is an uncertain event, and that may or may not occur during the project. You've just got to think about it and think about what could happen if. It can have that negative or a positive effect on the progress towards your objectives. So a negative effect could be that it slows you down because something's not delivered, or positive could be that you finish a package of work earlier and then you need to accelerate that. But maybe you're dependent on a third party who's going to provide you access to the test facilities. What happens if you finish 2 months early and you've got 2 months before you can start testing that work pack, that product? It could be a minimal viable product or a proof of concept. That could be positive that you finished early, but then how are you going to manage the impact of finishing early? And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Neil, who's going to start describing to you risk registers.
Actually, first off is maybe go back 1 slide, actually, Emma, if I could.
Yeah.
That is to say, risk is, there's many, certainly what I've seen in the past is that if you're not used to constructing a project around risk management, then risk can be seen as a negative thing. I would put that on its head. I think that in this context, certainly, to have an element of risk, to have an element of managed risk within the project is absolutely essential. Without risk, it becomes a case of just doing it. And that really isn't going to build up the necessary momentum to trap grant funding. By the same token, to just give it a whirl, to just give it a bit of a punt and see how it goes, is a bit more of a cavalier attitude, and in itself it's the other end of the spectrum, really. I've seen also, I think we got on this within the last workshop, which is that the real essence of this funding is to enable you to get it wrong, not to really has to be configured around getting it right. And that's really where risk comes in. So do you want to go to the next slide, yeah. Emma? Thank you. So the key thing, I mean, risk registers are, there's a reasonably standard format for these things. The main one, just go on. Okay, so the key thing there really is that it starts to formalize and marshal risks into some sort of a handleable format. And if you can describe it, then you can start to deal with it. I suppose the only absolute no-no here is just sticking your head in the sand and hoping that everything's going to be okay. So that ranking, probability and impact. In fact, probability and impact are the two main ones. And however you want to configure it, you should be looking to something like a rating of probability times impact. The other factor about a risk register is that you've got to figure out, you've got some sort of plan B, a mitigation plan. We'll go on to some examples later on, but really that should be the way that it gets you out the hole. If this factor puts you in a bit of a hole, then this is the mitigation plan, and it can be quite brief, is what gets you out of it. Also, what I would say right at this point is the mitigation plan should actually have some bearing on the work plan. So if you're saying something is going to cause you a problem and you've got to do something about it, then certainly as an assessor, I'd want to see where you're doing something about it, how much resource you're putting towards it, how much priority you're putting to it. And also, someone's owning it. It's not just floating in there. I know there was one instance, and I remember from the last session, where the management team and management and execution team was essentially a single person, in which case the ownership actually is a little bit of a little bit trivial. But by the same token, there's other factors that maybe have third-party engagement, in which case, you're either looking at one of the team or somebody from outside the consortium, outside the team, that's going to actually get you out the potential hole. Can we have the next slide, Emma? Thank you. Okay, so these categories here are the standard ones. These are the ones that are listed in the guidance for applicants. And I think we've said it again. In fact, we say it again and again. Read the question, read the guidance for applicants. A lot of the clues are actually there. Technical risks really are what I would see, and the projects that I get involved in, they are the ones that could really contribute to, generally they're the ones that are contributing to what I call performance risks. Does the whole thing actually work? Can we make it work? Technical is, I'd say, with a small t, and is to do with the technique, the particular mechanism that you want to achieve. It could be product stuff, it could be process. It doesn't necessarily mean hard technical. Management risks, obviously, in coordinating, I suppose, both the conduct of the project and the outputs from it. This also always sits within a commercial environment. The commercial stuff really should have, I'd say, almost sort of topping and tailing the project. Commercial considerations are what lead you into doing it in the first place, and commercial outputs, exploitable outputs, leading to things like competitiveness, increased GVA, jobs, all the rest of it, increased commercial momentum, turnover, etc. Environmental risks, that's really kind of, you know, how you want to take it. I would say that certainly all projects would have, that I could conceive of certainly within this field, would have some sort of technical management and commercial risks. When it comes down to the other factors, it really depends on your particular case. Environmental considerations, some sort of legal stuff, you know, if there's specific factors around the existence of either competing IPR or the need for IPR registration and management, etc. And political factors, you know, is the wind suddenly going to change direction? Is there something that you are doing that either services or hinders someone else's agenda? So little notes there, you know, also thinking about, you know, the engagement, the wider supply chain, access to the people to do stuff and to facilities as well. Can we have the next slide, please, Emma? Okay, so this again is again looking at, you know, the techniques for ranking. And again, you know, we'll come down to this. It's quite a robust way of doing it. Probability and impact. I think we've got. Is there a matrix on the next slide? I'm going off my memory here, Emma.
The matrix is later on with the examples. So the next one is the matrices will show later on with the examples. So we've got another 2 slides and we've got the matrix.
Very good. Can we have the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, I mean, these are my words rather than the words from the assessor brief, but this is a distillation of a fair bit of experience. Really, I think the key risk factors, and I would characterize this, if you're looking to try to figure out what should be in, what should be out, then what's stopping you from doing this thing right now? Where's the impediment? If it's we don't know something, I don't know something, then the task that comes out of that is, well, find out. You know, try it, figure it, trial it, research it, whatever. And I tend to put risks into a couple of different categories. These are practical categories rather than topic area categories. There's execution risks. The factors that are going to stop you from either conducting or completing the project. Things like you run out of people, you run out of money, you've got, you know, I don't know, flood damage in the building you're working in. A lot of these can be third-party things and things that maybe you don't necessarily have that much agency over, but which you still have to prepare a bit of a plan B for. I would say, generally speaking, a lot of stuff that we've experienced around COVID, for example, would come under execution risks. You know, lengthened delivery times, accessibility of, you know, people, working environment, that sort of stuff. And then the other factor is performance risks, which I would say tend to cluster around the technical risks. They are the things that would stop the idea working. What are the what are the weak links in the chain? Where could it really all go wrong? Also, I would say if you're looking at performance risks, and if you get this right, then that should also be a reasonable definition or characterization of what it is that would prevent anyone else doing this. And if you're thinking about that, then you're automatically thinking about where you've got potential IP gains here. If you're coming up with this wonderful, bright idea, and you have to go through a set of steps to actually figure it out and get it to work and develop it and all the rest of it, then anyone else that wants to follow along that route has to do the same thing. And that final question there is actually, it's the one that I tend to use when I am as a monitoring officer. And and it's often it's the sort of final thing within a review meeting. What's keeping you awake at night? What really worries you? Where do you really think things could go either horribly wrong or not right at all with this? Can we have the next slide, please, Emma?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, I put this slide in because I spent 15 years as a reserve army officer, and lots of experiences within that time. But the MOD put a fair bit of effort and time and money into teaching me how to be an effective manager of risk. Now, this is the process that sits at the heart of what's called mission analysis. And it's the sort of thing that the British Army actually teaches even its junior NCOs, how to figure out what to do next. The process basically is you identify a factor, some sort of factor that's going to cause you a bit of an issue. The deduction is, so what does that actually mean? What does this actually mean? How's it going to impact on what we want to do? And then out of that, either drops military terminal or MOD technology, either task or constraint, something that you have to do, in order to mitigate this risk factor, or a constraint, something that you can't do, something that's going to prevent you doing, and therefore is going to, beg your pardon, is going to influence what you do next. So can we have the next slide, please?
Yes.
Actually, sorry, no, before we move off that, Emma, just it occurred to me thinking through this session. I think that in many ways, this part, mission analysis, part of the combat estimate, is actually not unlike what I see in a lot of innovation projects, because there's this little thing at the start of that's is that car alarm bothering everybody?
Hopefully it won't last too long. It stopped.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Oh,
yeah, dealing with uncertainty actually, I think, is all part of what this is about. And the sort of many of the conversations that I have at the early part of this, people not sure what to do, not sure how to construct things. It's all about, well, I don't know what's going to happen next. You can have a fair idea and you can sketch out your plan A, B, C. Sorry, bear with me 2 seconds. I'm going to go and put my windows up.
Okay, we'll just wait for Neil to come back. There he is.
Right, that's a little bit better. Just gets a little bit hot in here. So if you see me sweating, it's not anything to do with the presentation. Yeah, I thought it was quite relevant to run through this because, like I say, there's an adage in sort of military terminology: no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and that's equally true about innovation. You can sketch out. I mean, 12 months isn't a long time, but it's long enough to have a few twists and turns. So this is just really a case of pre-thinking one or two of the things that might just shoot across your bows. And certainly as an assessor, I wouldn't necessarily expect to see a fully fleshed out, fully mature set of contingencies for absolutely every occurrence. But I think you can convey a sense that you could be ready for anything. And that really is, it's a sort of softer way of doing it. So I think we're ready for the next slide, Emma, possibly.
So the next set of slides is examples of risk registers. So we've got 3 examples for you, Neil, to work through. So I'll start with the first one. This is the work package one.
Okay, so this is a fairly standard sort of breakdown of risk register that I'd expect to see both at the application and indeed in the execution phases. So you've got a little bit of a taxonomy. Sometimes you can have, risk. It's quite usual to, number risks, technical risks, T01, 02, managerial, M01, etc., all the rest of it. It gives them some sort of a definition, a handle, a hook. In IT terms, I think I'd say this is almost like raising a ticket. It's something that you can identify and work with. It means that everybody's talking about the same thing. So you need some sort of a definition of what it is about, which are often things like, the example there, delayed delivery. How do you categorize that? Is it something that is it a third party thing? Is it, in this case, classified as external because it's not actually happening in your own organization, but it's a technical risk. The risk factor really is, and to get a rough characterization, you can use any sort of traffic lighting system you want. What I would tend to do, just a bit of a word here, as an assessor, I wouldn't bother about the low risks. I would look at them and see that there was a number of them, and maybe that there was some sort of process going on, but I wouldn't necessarily look at them in any detail. I would actually tend to lock onto the 2 or 3 high risk areas, the things that I can see actually are going to start to characterize and influence what you do next. So, if you've got a 12-month project, 12-month 50K, if you're going beyond about a dozen identified risks, I'd say you're probably sweating it a little bit too much, as a very rough feel. If you've got 2 or 3, then you're probably being a little bit cavalier about it. So risk before mitigation, a rating, that could be medium. That's maybe a low probability and a medium impact, for example. Some sort of group mitigation factor, and I'd expect there to be a reasonable amount of thought gone into that. And this is where I think the real characteristic and the character of a project comes out. I would suggest that you might want to consider writing the risk register or writing the risk analysis at an early part of the project planning, because it should really flush out the absolute things that you need to do. If you really understand your risks, then you really understand the nature of your project. Even if that is, we don't know what the hell we're doing, and therefore the mitigation factor is find out what the hell you're doing, get to the point of doing it, have a number of things and trial them, or just chuck something into do a very rough proof of concept stuff. The early part of my career was in manufacturing and combat aircraft, and you would not believe the number of really quite expensive, highly engineered fighter aircraft structures that first saw the light of day as bits of cardboard and sellotape on someone's desk. It's just flushing the stuff out early. And of course, then you can get some sort of reckoning of the risk post-mitigation. That column, I would say, is I would classify that as a more advanced method of a risk assessment. Certainly what I would expect to see as a very minimum is some definition of what we're talking about, a rating on the severity or classification of the risk, and a mitigation.
If I can add something to this, that's okay, Neil.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we included this example, we're going to give you 3 different examples, is that in the earlier workshop, we talked about work packages and the tasks within the work package and link that through. So if you've never done a risk register before and you don't know where to start, then actually looking at that work package, looking at that task and asking yourself that question, what impact will it have on my ability to deliver that work package if I don't complete that task? What can I do? Is there a risk associated with completing that task? And if there is a risk, what can I do to mitigate it? So what I've done in this example, and when you get the slides, you can have a read through, is I've just thought about a couple of little examples, which include technical, management, and legal. I've given them a high, medium, and low. And then I've given a little estimate as to what that looks like once you've got a backup plan or you've thought about it. And for those of you who are starting completely from scratch and you've never done it before, it's a really good way to actually start to think about your project and also think about your work packages and think about your Gantt chart. So I always see this as being, it's a circular activity, isn't it, Neil? It's not a linear, I do the project plan, I do the Gantt chart, and I do the risk register. You're constantly going around in a circle and testing it, aren't you?
Indeed. What I would definitely say, one of the major things I would advocate against is leaving it until right to the end, because by that time you suddenly get an appreciation of what it's really about, and actually you've locked in all your planning, which is could lead to a lot of wasted effort.
Shall I move to the next example? Which is, that's bringing in the next example, we're bringing in the next level. The one after that will be a little even more complicated. But this is what we call a ranked risk register. So this is where you look at the impact and the probability, and you look about how that actually starts impacting on your product and delivery, which is what Neil was alluding to. So back to you, Neil.
Yes, what I would say, the two gradings that I've generally seen used are 1 to 5 or 1 to 3. 1 to 5 gives you a bit of greater granularity, but actually I don't think it necessarily, low, medium, high is generally speaking about enough to get an idea of where the real issues are. And that then, it's the same sort of format. You define what the risk is, put a bit of an assessment against it in terms of the probability, its likelihood, and then the impact on. You can either have, impact is a multifaceted thing. It's something that's going to cost you really time or money. I think these are the key things. If you're doing it in a full sense, you'd have other factors like time, money, reputation, all the rest of it. But certainly as a minimum, something that's going to cost you either time in the project, it's going to take you longer to do something, or it's going to cost you more to achieve the same. And again, a mitigation column there. I've seen some quite extensive mitigations which actually start to then look like task definitions. I think that it is very, very good to be able to link these up with the work plan. That's something that does actually tend to get missed off. I think it's a characteristic. A really good connected thinking is something that you look at it and it's almost invisible. It just happens. By the same token, it's a really good way of demonstrating a lack of connectivity. If the key things that you say you need to be doing within the mitigation factors have got no bearing whatsoever on what's happening during the project.
I'd like to add something. Neil said that he doesn't look at the low risks. I actually, when I'm looking at somebody's draft, I look to see what they've put as a low risk, and I look to see whether I agree with them or not.
Yes, yes.
Because I think it's really important that something that I think is that somebody thinks is a low risk, I think is quite high. And I'll give an example of a project that I was doing with a team, and they basically were part of it was going to be fabrication of a chip, and they literally had this gold standard, and everything was stacked up to the end of the project. And I said, and they put it down as a low risk of it being delivered because they were going to subcontract it to the leading manufacturer who had the best expertise in this area. And I looked at that and I said, there's no way that's a low risk. You need to, it's too far down the line of the project. It needs to be a lot closer. And in fact, you need to have a backup plan or actually go for something that much simpler do that. And actually you can sort of challenge that risk. And when an assessor is going to look at your application, they will probably look to see about what those risks are. But the great thing is, and this is where Neil is our great expert, is as a monitoring officer, when you're successful, you can sit down and you can review all of those risks, can't you? And think about the tasks and the deliveries and just sort of have a chat about, have we done it properly? Does it need to be revised? So do you want to talk maybe a little bit about that process as well, about how it's used before we move on? Or do you want to do that later?
Yes, certainly. No, absolutely. I think that this is, you got the, we had the previous example, which is, pre and post mitigation. But also, I would expect the risk matrix to evolve quite significantly during the course of a project, because that's really what the project is about. I fundamentally hold that the only justifiable use for public funding in this area is to underwrite risk. If there's no risk, then it just becomes a straight business factor, and you resource it, you do it, you put the effort in, and you get the results out. The fact that there is risk is a characteristic of what has driven you into this innovation space anyway. And in fact, I think it is a factor. I've had various presentations of things I've been exposed to over the last couple of days, some of which have been involved in things like R&D tax credit stuff. And it's one of the things that HMRC uses as a guideline for their assessment of whether something qualifies for R&D tax credits. It's the level of risk associated with it. So I would expect to see you starting the project with a matrix that might, let's say, are a dozen risks. There might be 2 or 3 which are absolutely high. By the time you're halfway through the project, I'd expect to have some reduction in that. And really, basically, by the time you finish the project, your execution risks should be 0 because you have conducted the project. And your performance risks should be significantly reduced from where they were, because that's the real substance of the work.
Yeah. Should we move to the next slide? So we're moving on to the red, amber, green matrix. So the last risk register example we're going to give you is one that you might see, which in my opinion is not appropriate for most of you because you've got a short project, it's 50K, but actually can be useful as an internal tool, or can be useful if you're working with a more complex project, or if you're a partner in a project, in an Innovate UK grant application or another complex project where you might actually be asked to put your risks in this methodology. So we thought we'd introduce that, the concept that you've got what's known as a RAG, or a red, amber, green risk register. So what this...
We would also say...
Yeah.
Just to this stage, sorry, Emma, the guidance for applicants gives the assessor crib has got 2 parts really to the whole risk management bit. The first one of which actually is demonstrating that you have a process. that you've identified a process for identifying, classifying, apportioning, managing, and closing risks. That could actually almost be a bit of a sort of cut and paste kind of textbook thing, but it has to be credible. You know, if it looks too cut and paste, then it'll sort of raise eyebrows. But this is the sort of thing that goes into that. This sort of diagram is the sort of thing that I've often seen associated with, this is how we do it. This is how we're going to classify risk. And also, what you often see within this is the sort of pre and post mitigation situations. It gives you a chance to be quite graphic about it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fine. A lot of people like to use a color coding. It seems to work really well for people visually because it gives you a really quick visualization of where you're at. You can move something from green you'd see as low, yellow you'd see as medium, red you'd see as high. And I find that most of the reporting that I've been asked to do by government has actually had a red, amber, green sort of approach to what we're doing, and that when we've been reporting dashboards that I've got has been red, amber, green. And I think some of the software, for those of you who like software tools, etc., there are sort of risk register software tools which also you tend to work on a red, amber, green process. So it's one that's sort of very easy to capture. You can use this as your little framework to decide what's high, medium, and low. And then you can just report against high, medium, and low on your project because you've demonstrated how you're calculating that. There's a question that we've had from a couple of people about whether you lose marks if you don't provide a credible risk register. And it's got to be credible. There's got to be a process, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a huge deal breaker, does it, Neil?
I think that I think you wouldn't gain marks if you can't demonstrate that you've got some sort of handle on risk. It is a bit of a it's not necessarily one of the gateway points, but I think I would regard it as something in the same way that if you can't present, if you fail to present an idea of what it is you're doing within the project, that again, it doesn't give the opportunity to for an assessor to provide marks. I've actually given reasonable marks in the past for risk assessments which have been purely narrative, but as long as they capture the right points, in the same way that actually it's possible to describe a project schedule without using a Gantt chart. It doesn't necessarily preclude it, but the norms are there for a reason. It's because they actually are the most efficient way of doing it, usually.
Yeah. Shall I move on to the next slide of what it looks like as a and the headings that you'd probably have in something like this will change as well, won't they? Because you'll have some additional criteria that you'd be talking to.
To be honest, that set of headings in a table is actually pretty good. I would say it's what I see a lot of, and I've seen some very, very slick organizations presenting risk in this way.
Yeah. And what I like about having this process, I'm very visual, and I like to break things down to tasks. So for me, I used to run a really complex project. We were transferring a desk-based biological process that I developed with my team, and we're trying to automate it into a medical device. And when we were doing that, I had to, for the project planning for what was Smart Awards at the time, the grants that we got, we had to report the risk. And I also had to report them to the Scientific Advisory Board and to the actual, the chair and the company board. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to see that we knew all the tasks were and everything. But actually what they were more interested in was that red, amber, green, where we were, the status, and how that mapped across the project, both for the investment funding and for the grant funding. And then internally, I could use it against tasks and in the more detail in the tasks with my colleagues. So we all knew, because we were all dependent on each other. We had the cell biology team, we had the in vivo team, etc. So what it was, I found is it was a really useful communication tool across we had collaborators in the US. I was based in Northern Ireland at the time. We were working with the US. We were working with subcontractors in the UK. We had 2 organizations we were actually working with in Northern Ireland. And we had the project team, of which there were 3 groups within the project team that I was reporting to, plus the scientific advisory board, who were looking at the scientific side of things, and the overall board, which had investor representatives on there who were looking about what we were doing and how we're spending the money. So I had something complicated, and then what I did is I made it simple for everybody, depending on who I was talking to. And it was just a fantastic way of keeping everybody informed and on track and keeping that confidence going. So I recommend spending a bit of time using it as a project management tool as well.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I'll come back to this point again, Emma. I think it demonstrably adds the value to the project to see the risk matrix change. So as a live tool, I think it's really good.
So one of the other things that it's worth saying is when you start a project, and this is one of the key things that Neil and I talked about when we were talking about what is it you needed to know, is really how do you use this as well to get the project going, to make sure you've got all your tasks on there, and also to measure your success. Sometimes it's very hard. All you do is you're looking forward and you're not looking back to see what you've actually achieved, and know when to celebrate as an individual, as a team, as an organization that you've reached a milestone. So actually use it as a way of celebrating, and giving yourself that time to say well done, giving yourself that time to say to the rest of the team, well done, look what we've achieved, look at all these lovely greens we've got here and what we've done. So I think it's really, really important that you put actions in there which are kind of positive and affirmative actions as well. But
absolutely, and I would, in the same way, my wife actually is she often sort of writes lists of things to do and actually crosses them off immediately just because she has done them. But the whole philosophy of demonstrating, and you know, I often find myself in a monitoring sense in the situation where I'm the one that's saying to the project team, actually, you've reduced that risk because look, you've done it. You said you needed to get the results to this particular level. You've done it. You've proved it. So strike it out. Don't take it off the risk register. Strike it out to make sure actually it's a demonstration that you've achieved something. It's one of the factors that certainly within the Innovate UK grant system, monitoring system, it's one of the factors that is monitored on a quarterly basis. If you haven't met that before, the big 6 tick boxes or RAG status indicators on a project are scope, cost, and time, which basically matches onto what you have in an offer letter, and then exploitation, risk management, and project planning. So as a monitoring officer, every quarter I'm rating projects on their management of risk. And that doesn't mean that things aren't happening. You know, I can be giving them, in fact, I can be giving them extra points if they are meeting risks, if stuff is coming up and they're doing something about it. So it's not a case of, similarly, you know, we can equally have the situation where, you know, I'm a little bit sort of mediocre about something that, you know, if nothing's really happening. I think risk-taking, responsible risk-taking is definitely a part of this sort of project.
Yeah. There's a question here from Constance around how does the colors in the status column relate to the colors in the priority level. So priority level is your impact time probability. So what's your calculated as a risk? You've got a mitigation, you've got an owner. The status is actually that you've done everything, you've mitigated that risk, and actually you now know that everything's going to be done online without management. Maybe you've recruited that person, and it's actually a low risk because they're due to start in a month's time or whatever, or 2 months time. So it's still open, but the risk is lower because you've managed that recruitment process. So it's a management risk there. Where the technical, you might start with so that's gone from a green, from a red rather, high risk to a medium risk, because you've actually achieved that. You're going to achieve it within that milestone, so it's no longer a high risk. With a technical one, you could be that you've reached a particular technical milestone, so you know it's actually going to be a very low risk because you've shown that you can actually work within that parameter, so you've taken away that risk. Environmental and societal. So say, for example, you need to get, the example I gave was around the new, what is it, UK Conformity Mark. It's written on my wall rather than CE mark because I can't remember it. So the UK Conformity Mark, it might be that you thought the environmental risks associated with are very quite low, but actually maybe the new piece of legislation that's coming out and you're going to have to conform to you can't just conform to the UK, you're going to have to conform to the CE marking, and suddenly it becomes a red risk because you hadn't planned for it, so you need to take action. So it's open, but it's actually gone from green to a red because something's happened in that you hadn't anticipated. And that's what I'm saying, that it's a live document within there. So so that's what we mean about you'll be doing that. So actually, if you had a really complex risk chart, you'd be sort of reporting, people would be reporting activities, you'd be looking at it, you'd be going back to the slide where we had this matrix here and saying, well, what's the probability, what's the impact? Well, the probability is now 5 because we found out that legislation, we are going to have to conform to that particular legislation, and the impact it's going to have on us is actually, it's a deal breaker. I can give an example now of a really lovely startup company that I'm working with. And there is a new security. So they've done their proof of concept, they've built their MVP, they've got people using it, they're all ready to go live onto the Apple platform as an app. And then Apple put in a new requirement around security. And so everybody who goes onto that platform needs to put that time in. Guess what the cost is to the company to do that piece of software and things? Now, this is a startup that's bootstrapped and managed to do everything with probably, I don't know, probably less than 120K over that period of time. Probably going to cost them around about 40 to 50K to do that software development and to work backwards. So suddenly it went from it's doable, it's actually probably an amber risk, but the cost of the business and commercialization is like, take action. So they went out to raise more investment to be able to get enough funding to be able to do that, and to have enough money to carry on what they needed to do with the commercialization plan. And that's the sort of thing that happens in the real world when you're working, because there are things that come through that unexpected things that come through.
Yeah.
So
this is sort of live project stuff. But having said that, I think the key thing is that if you get the risk assessment right at the application stage, then it makes the execution phase of it that bit easier.
I mean, as a monitoring officer, would you like to be reported to against a risk register or a Gantt chart?
Two things important, actually. It's a really good question, that Emma. I think the first thing that I'd like to be reported against or through is a deliverables list. So for me, it's the deliverables and the risks that defines it. Gantt chart actually is how you get there. And yes, it's important to have it there as a process, to know that the scheduling of activities and all the rest of it. But actually, in itself, it doesn't really tell you what's what is going on, what's really going on within a project. One of the best examples I found of risk management within a project actually was within one of the very early projects that I monitored. And these guys, it was part of the intro at the review meetings. It was, here's the overall aims of the project, and here's the key current risks. And now we're going to tell you what we did, into the sort of technical presentations.
Cool. Well, just be mindful of time now. So why is this important? You can anticipate the known unknowns, but what you need to do is be able to be equipped and agile enough to deal with the unknown unknowns. And that's why risk registers are really important. So capture what you know is an unknown, something you can't control, that's there. And then if you've got that, it's going to be so much easier to deal with a curveball when it comes through, or if the cat's amongst the pigeons or whatever. So whatever analogy you'd like to use. So just to start winding this up before we go to the Q&As, there are a lot of tools and resources that can help you identify project risks. And you need to be thinking about how you're going to capture them for your innovation. So just to recap, we've said project plan and Gantt charts are really important. You can do what's called a root cause analysis or a checklist analysis of your project plan, and just think like, well, what would be the root of the problem? How would be there? What can I do to make sure it doesn't happen? Or you, as you've discussed, Neil's discussed, you can make a checklist of all the things that can go wrong and then just test it. Test your assumption, test your assumptions, and test the quality of the data that you're using to make those assumptions as well. You've got what's called a market prioritization approach. So that's using the PESTLE analysis. That's political, environmental, social, technological, legal, and whatever the other one is. And that's market sizing can also be a way of doing your prioritization and understanding what the drivers are in the market and the risks there. Or you can do a simple strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, as well as to identify. And that can be used for things like your commercial risks, and your to market plans in particular. And the PESTLE is really good for looking what kind of legislative, patenting, or legal or ISO standards you might have to conform to. And also don't forget the impact of society and the resistance that society can have. I think COVID-19 has shown really just how society reacts to new technologies and how they perceive risks and the different risks that are there, about whether people do or don't want to wear masks, whether people do or don't want to be vaccinated, whether people do or don't agree with PCR testing and lateral flow device testing in different work environments. Those can be huge influences about how people adopt and use your technology. And they can also vary in different countries. So in Switzerland, they didn't do a lot of lockdown because everybody was quite happy to have their mobile phones used for proximity testing. Whereas in the UK, everybody said no. So there was a difference then about how government chose to manage people's movement during the lockdowns. So I think that's a really good examples of what's happened recently to make you think about some of those influences around technology. And those of you who are working with maybe on a social enterprise type of project, that can also be quite an important element to factor in, how you're going to communicate with the communities that you're supporting about the benefits of what you're doing to get their buy-in and their adoption. And then the other approach is that market research and validation that you need to do. So how do you get that validation? Well, interview your stakeholders, ask them what they see the risks are going to be in the area around your technology, capture that. Look at white papers, any trade publications, look at upcoming legislation or legislation that exists. You can also look at the political will. If you go to Hansard, that's the government publications and what's being talked about in Parliament. There's on the back of the post notes, which is the Office of Science and Technology, there's quite often they'll be briefing either in the House of Lords or the Houses of Parliament around what the thoughts are. And then there's also kind of the national and international trends, and those, as we talked about, the social and political. And as I said, the pandemic's been a really good example of all those different social impacts that have come in and different behaviors in different territories. So those are sort of the tools that I'd suggest you use to start thinking out about what your risks are. Neil, is there anything else you want to add to to that?
No, again, it's the timing of it. I think there's a couple of things here, a couple of messages that I would like to try to impart. Number one is that actually it's quite good to at least have a back of a fag packet version of your risk planning actually right up front. And that question I posed earlier, what's stopping you doing it right now, I think is quite an important one to lead off on that one. And that's before you start to structure tasks and then, you know, associate risks with them. It also can give you an idea of the prioritization. I think also your notion of it being an iterative process is pretty good. I've met a lot of applications, curiously large number of applications where the risk analysis, which is almost the last bit that seems to have been written, includes all the real nuggets. You know, it includes all the characterization of the real challenges of the project, but yet these are never translated into the key bits of planning. So really, the pitfall, the minefield there is, if you say something's important, then make sure you're visibly doing something about it.
Yeah. And actually, I think you just highlighted something that's really important. You've got to show that your innovation has got a risk associated with it and why it deserves to have public sector funding. And actually, your risk register is a really good way of teasing out what those risks are and saying, have I, in my text, really made that clear and transparent that this is risky, that this is the clever bit, this is where the innovation is, this is what needs to be done. And remember, this award is not just about innovation in technology, it can be innovation in societal and social areas. So, you know, you're changing a mindset or the way people are doing. So there could be a really important legislative or societal or political or, you know, a people driver in what you're doing. And that's why the application has been done this way. So it allows more people to feel confident that what they've got is aligned to this funding. So it's not just about technology. This is about adoption of technology, of processes. I said, if you're a social enterprise or you're doing something which is around improving society, you know, having a societal benefit, it's not just about that technology. Yeah. And then just to wrap up before I go to the Q&A, again, I've talked about this beforehand. These are the top tips. Just make sure you've read everything, you're doing everything, you've timed everything properly, you've got a nice, clear, concise plan. Do go and have a look at the Good Application Guide. It's geared up for a full Innovate UK application, but it's got some useful information in there. And our newsletters, I've already given you the links to the recordings to the Women in Innovation that is on our webpage. Any of the activities which are sort of associated around, which will be open, will also be promoted through this. So if you sign up to our newsletters in your technology sector and area, there'll be maybe more activities that would be really useful and you can benefit from. And scope. If you've got any questions, you're unclear after these 3 workshops about whether you've got the scope right, whether you've actually approached the questions appropriately for the sort of innovation and technology you've got, then do ask the competitions team for help. They will answer as much as they can. There's a frequently asked questions that's constantly being updated. And they'll also signpost you, only could be signposted to ourselves or to some other advisors. So they will be there to help. They are trying to support this program as much as possible. And the last thing, as we've said each time, it really is around making sure that you stand out from the crowd. This is a really popular competition, and we really want to have as many people as possible funded. There's, I think, funding for a minimum of, or they're aiming a minimum of 20 people to be funded on this program. So there is a lot of competition and there's some really great innovation. So think about how you're going to stand out from the crowd. And at that point, I'd also say, like to say good luck to all of you. Said this is the last of our 3 workshops. I'm going to stop the share now, if that's okay, Neil. Is that okay? So, and then what we'll do is we'll just review the Q&A, if that's okay. So I think we've answered quite a few of the questions as we've gone along, but let me just have a quick look at that.
I'll let you lead in this, Emma, and draw me in where you want me.
Okay, then. So there's a question on the duration of the program. It needs to be 12 months. Yes, it does need to be 12 months. That is part of the eligibility criteria. Registration of the company with Companies House or the company for 12 months. I think, Selene, you've answered that for us, but your company needs to be registered, but does not have to have been registered in Companies House for a period of a year or more. It can be 6 months. However, you will need to provide financial accounts, including a business bank account in the name of your business with a transaction for a period greater than a year. And that's from the date of when the competition closed. Is that right, Selene? I'm pretty certain.
Yes, sorry. I'm like going yes, and I forgot.
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, if you've got a query about that, then do get in touch with Selene.
Well, actually, do get in touch with Innovate UK. So on the FAQ page, you will have the email address of customer support at Innovate UK. So please contact them directly. There's also their phone number and the detail of when the lines are open. Yeah, they're the best point of call for those questions around eligibility and the application process.
And you will necessarily get a name of an individual because there are a lot of applicants and the workload is spread around. So, please don't try and hunt down an individual. Just go into that portal and it will get signposted to somebody within the team. Going to one person all the time is not going to change anything. They're all working from the same sort of information within the team. Do we need to cover all the risk factors or just the ones you think will apply to your case? Yes, you've just got to, and Neil, I mean, as a monitoring officer for a project of this duration and amount, what would be your advice around that? What sort of risk factors do you think are the critical ones?
It's the stuff that's going to really cause the issue. I mean, like I said, if you consider firstly the execution risks, stuff that's going to stop you doing the project, and then stuff that's going to compromise the performance or the output of where you get to with it, i.e. the idea doesn't work or doesn't work enough, then these are the things that I would consider in there. If they're, you can have I don't know, a meteor falling on your business premises is a valid finite risk, but it's not something that you're ever going to have to really do anything about. I think that it's when you get into that sort of territory, then it's starting to have less impact. However, the key things that are associated with your idea, they should be on there. The stuff that really could prevent it working. Like I say, rough order of magnitude, gut feel, about a dozen risks is comfortable. Any more than that, and you're probably diluting a bit.
So there's another question which is perhaps relevant for you to answer. If you are building an MVP that won't launch during the project, do we need to include risks that are only throughout the project or some that may arise following a successful project in commercialization phase?
Well, frankly, it's stuff that you can do something about during the project. If you don't have any agency during the course of the project, then it's not relevant for the project. It's not a project risk. It's a wider risk.
But I would actually add to that, but I would include it as a commercialization risk because part of your process is to build that in. So under commercialization, I would say that part of what I have to do now is to build up the relationships or understand features or understand something around the segmentation of my market in order to be able to address that. Because what we do want to see is how you're going to exploit and what your business is going to look like in 3, 5, 10 years time. So you need to make sure that in your project plan that there is some thinking around the stages towards commercialization. So I would include them. Those relevant.
Indeed, and to be honest, actually, the risk analysis is maybe attracting a bit more attention here than it really should do. The initial risk analysis is always going to change, and it should change really at the first turn. As soon as you're off the starting blocks of the project, it should change. So it's never going to be the definitive article. What you do need to convey within this your response to this question is that you are capable of handling risk. There's something in the back of my mind there. That's right. I've seen a lot of sludge in risk analysis with what I would call, axiomatic or trivial risks, things that should be taken care of by proper business practices, proper project management. If that's where you're going with risk analysis, then you're not really adding to it. It's not characterizing your project. It's characterizing every business and every project. What I'm looking for, what I was always looking for within a risk analysis is the stuff that characterizes this specific project. What is it about this specific project that's going to be tricky?
Yeah. And back to Gala's question, yes, you do have to have a project that is innovative. And that's what's sort of being funded. So there has to be a risk. Now, the definition of innovative is actually quite broad in this competition. Because we are looking not just at technologies, we're looking at sort of, social enterprises and other areas within that. Was it relevant to include your personal development challenges in the risks, e.g. lack of experience in a certain field? Well, that's part of the additional value of doing the Women in Innovation program. So for me, I would definitely say that actually you could say that the Women in Innovations training is going to help me address my weakness in a certain area, and that's how I'm going to benefit from the program. So if you're lacking certain skills, say you don't know marketing skills, or there's some skills around IP, which is a risk to your business, the fact you're going to get some training and support on that, or you're going to have those contacts in that area, is going to help you address that weakness, isn't it? And those about identifying what that program is going to give to you, but they're not the priority, but it's good to include them, isn't it, in this program?
I think if it's going to cause an issue and it's going to cause a niggle, I'll come back down to my fundamental question: what's going to keep you awake at night?
Yeah. And you can also write in the application about how you're going to benefit from it. And you can actually put it in the narrative there that actually by getting this training and these introductions, it's going to allow me to conduct the project in a more informed manner. So then the management risk will be don't have the suitable skills to lead on the commercialization. Mitigation is going to be attend Women in Innovation masterclasses on marketing, sales, and intellectual property, or something like that, and then you're showing that you understand that you need to be doing something about it. There's a question here about supporting references from a colleague. We were going to have that answered in the FAQs, weren't we, Solène, about where letters of support should be. That was going to be done by Innovate UK.
I wasn't here the last workshop.
Oh yeah, so
I'm not aware of it.
So can we put that down?
If you discuss with Rachel, then I'm sure it will get done. There is definitely an appendix, so you can put it there.
Yeah. And that's what we said, is put things into appendices. Rachel was going to clarify that and put it onto the FAQ. There. I mean, I think it's good to quantify any support you've got within an organization or within facilities that you're working with around that, particularly if it's going to help enable you to deliver on that program. So let's see if there are any other questions. Galo, I think we've answered that question for you there. Let's see if there's anything else. As I've said, we're not going to lose any points or any marks in the risk. It's more about showing that you've got a process, but you won't score higher if you don't show that you've captured all of the the basic standard risks, and you haven't shown that you've got an understanding of
there's two facets. I would say two facets to this, Emma. number one is demonstrating confidence that you know what risk is and how to handle it. And number two, if your justification for the funding is then this is too risky without the funding, and you have not demonstrated that there's viable, that there is a significant and credible risk there, then actually that it weakens your argument, it undermines your argument for the funding.
There's a very interesting point here that's been raised by a couple of people, which again is about how comfortable you are disclosing. But we have had in other programs people with unpredictable health issues that could impact on the project. You know, whether you introduce those or not, I mean, it's a personal risk, but what you can do, and most of you will be doing this in your day-to-day lives anyway, you've already put in and you've mitigated for that, and you've put processes and things in place. So you could say there's a management risk of a key person not being able to deliver, and our mitigation plan is that we've got somebody else to do that. We've got a backup, or it can be delegated to another person. You don't have to tell us those key details that are for you to disclose. If you need any support, which we will call reasonable adjustment, then again, Innovate UK can help you with that. They're working with a very good diversity and ability as well, who have lots of tools and resources and know what's available to help entrepreneurs. So if you do have any issues, please do get in touch with the competitions team, and also post program. As a monitoring officer, Neil, have you encountered this kind of issue, and what would your advice be once the project's going?
I've encountered pretty much everything on the spectrum, from minor inconvenience of people leaving the organization to fatalities. Something disappearing and not being accessible, shall we say. You know, the system, it has to roll with the punches. You can't insulate yourself from everything, but by the same token, you can have a reasonable amount of buffering or contingency.
And I'd say I've experienced the same in the projects that I've done, the whole range of things. I always think it's always better to say things quite early on and get those addressed quite early on. My workplace, when I was in a startup company, they spent a lot of money on private healthcare, because they said you're also valuable in the startup company, that actually there's a key man thing, and it doesn't matter whether the humble glass washer upper or you're a group leader, you're all valuable to us. So if you've got any health issues, we don't want you suffering chronically or dealing with it. You go straight into the private healthcare system, you get sorted out, and you're back at work. So that was the approach that the organization I worked with. I've managed people with a number of health conditions, and the most important thing is to have that very transparent dialogue with your officer, whoever it is that you're working with, and just make sure you build in and plans to manage that. But there's no requirement to share anything that you do not wish to share, and you shouldn't feel that pressure to do so. So there was one request about the good application guide that is on the KTN website. There's multiple ways of getting in there. When you get the slides, you'll see the link of how to find that. If you just Google it and KTN, it'll come through, but there it goes through multiple routes on our new website to find it. It'll be there along with the good investment guide as well. And I think that is all of it. I will copy the good application guide link that I've got from the slides just into the chat box there. That should still work. I don't think it's broken with the new website. So that's the end of your 3 workshops. Hopefully we've covered all the areas that are some areas of concern in applying and how to do the application. They're structured based on the feedback from a roundtable that was done with previous applicants around where they needed the help and what sort of level of help they needed. It is very much geared at people who've never done anything like this before. So people who've never had to fill in a risk register don't even know what a risk register is. So hopefully now that we've talked you through it, you can go onto the internet, have a look around, look at the different examples that are out there, start thinking, okay, I'm doing my project, what sort of risks can I do? Have a piece of paper, like I said, post-its on the wall, put those risks on there as you go along and do that, because you might forget them if you don't write them down. As I said, I'm probably not doing very well for the trees, but I do love my post-it notes. I find they're very, very useful to capture everything. Find a piece of a nice big wall and start working with them. So thank you, Neil, as well as my fabulous host on the 2 workshops. And also to Solène, who's been supporting us on these. And unless there's any more questions, I think we can say go and enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend and get writing.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Emma. Thanks, Neil.
Okay.
Nice to meet you, Neil.
Dramas.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
10 spaces, you said, Emma. 10.
So what was that?
I said this is all about 10 spaces, 10 opportunities.
Yeah.
This is not an international competition, is it?
No, it's there's 20 places. There's 20 awards minimum that they're looking to give. So
20, not 10. That's
no, 20.
exciting.
I think it's 20, they said, yeah.
Wow. I know they said they increased it to 20 last time. Okay, cool.
I think it's 20. I'd have to